We on? Cool. Afternoon, everyone. So what I'm going to do really is provide a sort of contagious-themed introduction to this session on people power. I'll speak a little bit more about what I'm going to be talking about in this session in a moment or two, but just really quickly, if there's anyone here that isn't familiar with Contagious and what it is that we do, let me just tell you. So Contagious is a quarterly intelligence briefing publication, like Elizabeth has said. We focus on the very best in non-traditional advertising, experiential marketing, design, branding, and emerging technologies. Like I say, our core product is this quarterly publication that comes in online and app format. We have a bespoke intelligence feed service that we deliver into a number of brands and agencies around the world. We have a consultancy division now, which I work on. That's called Contagious Insider. And lastly, we have a free weekly newsletter. So if you like what you see today and you'd like a little bit more contagious love in your life every week, please do sign up for that because it's free. But I'm going to shut up now talking about what we do and what we sell, because if I were to stand here and keep talking at you, a captive audience, about our products and what we sell, that would kind of defeat the object of what I want to talk about today, which is simply the fact that people deserve, expect, and need more now from the brands that they engage with. Okay, more than just traditional top-down, shouty marketing messages, more than just the traditional hard sell. And why is that? Well, I think it's got a lot to do with the kind of landscape that we're all operating in now. You know, democratized technology, things like smartphone penetration, okay? We've got pervasive networks, these are the digital and social platforms across which so much of our daily lives are now spread. You know, and you combine this sort of democratized technology with these pervasive networks, and you've got this quick fix culture in which consumers, or rather people, know exactly what content or information or products or services they want. They know where they can go to get it, but most importantly, they want it now. Like I say, it's quick fix. So with that in mind, they can and will tune out of anything that feels like advertising or marketing. They don't have to sit there and be sold to. You know, but the third point is that, you know, if we behave in this way, if we, you know, access all these different digital and social platforms, the result of this is that we leave huge trails of data in our wakes. Okay, but people are getting smart now. You know, they realize that they're leaving a lot of data behind them, and they know that brands are getting access to this data, especially on platforms like Facebook. Okay, so increasingly they're starting to turn around and go, what's actually happening with my data? Where is it going, and what are brands using it for? Okay, so if you combine all of this, democratized technology, pervasive networks, okay, this quick fix culture, abundant data, what it really boils down to is the fact that they have increasing expectations of customer experiences. Okay, put really simply, people expect more from the brands they engage with. And a nice way to look at this is kind of the value exchange. Okay, if people are investing time or money or data with a brand, okay, then they expect to get something of genuine value or reward in return from that brand. But what kind of stuff are brands doing now? Well, you know, Nike is building stuff like the Fuel Band, okay? Everyone's talking about this at the moment. It's interesting because this essentially is a product with digital services layered into it. And it's smart because, I don't know if any of you guys were in the previous session when Tim Malbon from Made by Many was talking about the idea of services being a great way to kind of extend that engagement with a brand. But this is what Nike's realizing. They know that essentially you've got diminishing returns off a physical product. If someone buys a pair of sneakers, they're engaging with a brand when they buy that pair of sneakers, but they're not then going to engage with the brand again until 12, 24 months later when they need to buy another pair of sneakers. Okay, Fuel Band is tied into a much bigger Nike infrastructure in which people are engaging with the brand on a daily basis because Nike's helping them, you know, meet their fuel target and level up and get points and get fitter and make a positive change to their lifestyle. You know, this thing here, that's not a great bit of product design. That's a great bit of service design. And that's a really important difference. You know, and when it was launched, there were certain people at Nike tweeting things like this. We're a tech company now, which is kind of fascinating, I think. So, you know, we've got service design. Real-world relevance is really, really important for brands, okay? You know, brands like Pepsi, through things like their Refresh project, are acknowledging the fact that these big corporate entities need to be shown to, you know, to be affecting change in the real world as well as, you know, to the shareholdings. Okay, at Contagious, we call this projects, not campaigns. Put really simply, it's the idea of brands kind of nailing their colors to a mast and going, look, this is what we stand for in the real world, as well as just the hard sell and the stuff that we talk to you about on our marketing. So real-world relevance is really important. And lastly, open innovation. Okay, this just like the really simple idea that perhaps just perhaps consumers know best what consumers want. So it's big companies turning around and going, right, how about we actually ask our consumers what they would like more of? Ask them, kind of solicit feedback on the kind of products and services we should now be building. Okay, Barclaycard is doing this with things like Ring. Okay, so Ring is basically the first properly crowdsourced credit card. And this is interesting because if you go to the Barclaycard Ring homepage, there's a bit on the homepage that says we're pulling back the curtain between banks and customers, which is interesting because if there's one industry where that curtain needs to be pulled back and there needs to be more intimacy, it's definitely banking. So this is the kind of stuff that brands can now offer. This is the kind of value that brands can now offer in return for that kind of investment of time and money and data that customers put in. But it's this last section, open innovation, which I want to focus on today because I think it's going to fit quite nicely with the other presentations that we've got later on. But most of the stuff here, I think what it has in common is that it's all very consumer-centric. And essentially, the step to sort of knowing your consumer better is, know thy consumer. Find out what makes them tick. But what's really interesting is there's still quite widespread misconception that this step towards intimacy with consumers is one that brands are having to take. And I just don't think that's true. Because if you think about the transparency now afforded by social media, okay, the democratization of data and information that we've talked about, okay, whether or not brands like it, consumers are already right there. They're there. And what's more, because they're so close, they can see through brands, they can see through these metaphors of experience that brands create, they can see through all of that to the companies behind the brands. And that's really, really interesting, because I think what I'm going to be trying to look at today is essentially those brands, or companies rather, who on opening the front door and finding consumers standing right there are not slamming the door in their face and then sort of talking to them through the letterbox, and putting like products and messages through the letterbox to them, but inviting them in and saying, we want your help to make some proper changes to some of the most fundamental parts of our business. So that's it. I'm going to be looking at essentially this transition from social marketing to social business. Now, some of the other speakers today are going to be kind of deep diving into specific campaigns, markets, and China in particular, and specific demographics. What I'm going to do is try and give a kind of broad overview of this transition with a bit of a kind of slant towards emerging markets. But it's interesting. I mean, let's start at the beginning. If we think about social as a term, like perhaps unsurprisingly, the entry point for many brands into social has been the established networks. It's Facebook and it's Twitter and it's Orkut and so on and so forth. But it's stupid, really, because people don't join something like Facebook to be sold to or to be marketed to. Okay, they join Facebook to share stuff, to show off, to talk about stuff, to spy on people, to solicit feedback or advice or kind of help people. Okay, they don't go there to be sold to. So it's kind of crazy that brands are still treating Facebook and Twitter like another media channel. It doesn't work like that. And this is a nice quote from Sheryl Sandberg, Facebook CEO. And she says, "The internet was meant to herald the arrival of a more open, two-way dialogue between marketers and consumers, but that didn't really happen. We just created more ways of broadcasting." That's the problem if you just treat social networks like another media channel. They weren't created for marketing, so marketing doesn't work in the same way it does via traditional media channels. That's not rocket science, right? But it's interesting because if we look at the way that a lot of brands approach social media, and if I think of all the sort of supposedly social campaigns that get submitted to Contagious every quarter, and trust me, there are thousands, 95% of them, we see the brands approaching social media from this end, okay? Which I'm not sure if that's right, because if you approach social media from that end, you leapfrog the most important part, which is this bit. So for the purpose of the next kind of 20 minutes or so, I'd just like to kind of hypothetically decouple social and media, not worry about it as another media channel, but just think about doing business or behaving in a fundamentally social way. So I want to crack off with an example of a brand doing this, of using social media to properly affect how it does business as opposed to just how it markets to people. Now, this is a slightly older example, but it's good because it's proven, and it's from an emerging market, and the results from it are kind of staggering. So this is from a snack food brand called Hippo in India, and it's how they use Twitter to sort of address the fact that, to be honest, the retail infrastructure in India is very, very disorganized and disparate. But they use Twitter to bring that together and use a sense of cohesion across their company. Check this out.
Can you actually use social media to plug the gaps in the sales and distribution network in a huge country like India? Can social media get consumers to voluntarily work on the most technical aspects of a brand? Will brands be able to set up alternate sales and distribution networks using social media in the future? Hippo Baked Munchies may have found some first answers. Hippo Baked Munchies had a simple philosophy to help establish itself in the $1.5 billion Indian snack market. Exceeding expectations, the packs were flying off the shelves across 400,000 stores within hours. As 92% of the Indian market is still unorganized retail, unexpected sales overwhelmed Hippo's new but efficient sales and distribution network, and they found it challenging to keep track of the stock, identify empty stores in time, and restock to match the super demand for Hippo. How do you support an overwhelmed sales and distribution network and help them cope with the demand for Hippo by the hour and plug the supply gap? Hippo turned to social media to do something that it has never been expected to do before: to track stock and reinforce a sales and distribution network. Hippo asked his followers on Twitter to send him a tweet whenever they couldn't find Hippo in stores and promised to replenish stocks within hours. Soon, tweets were pouring in from over 45 cities. People were tweeting from hypermarkets, supermarkets, and their local grocery store. Hippo set up a core cell, which instantly passed the information that came in as tweets to the sales and distribution teams of the respective areas. This way, Hippo was able to identify empty racks faster and restock locations within hours. Hippo gave regular meticulous updates on stock replenishment to the people who tweeted in and informed Hippo about unavailability. At zero cost, the number of people tracking stocks across markets over Twitter were equivalent to 50% of its sales and distribution network itself. Hippo even sent out personalized anti-hunger hampers to the most active tweeters, complete with a handwritten note. And as people saw Hippo packs reappearing in stores on demand, Hippo's cult following on the internet began to grow. Blogs and articles began to pop up all over. Since demand was never a problem, by matching it with supply, Hippo managed to up its sales by 76% in its first few months of launch. The campaign even helped Hippo identify, gauge demand, and prioritize its high-potential new markets. While this campaign blurred the line between direct marketing, social media, and promotional campaigns, Hippo also effectively used social media to do what no one had done before: reinforce and support its sales and distribution network. To sum it up, Hippo killed hunger and 4 birds with one stone. Actually, with one bird.
So this is an interesting thing, and like I say, it's a great example of social being used not just as a bolt-on part of their marketing, but actually being used to affect how they do business. As you can see from that stat, 50% of their total sales and distribution network, this is now an integral part of what they do. So that's pretty interesting in terms of Twitter. Another nice example that uses Facebook and Orkut is something that we've seen recently from Magazine Luiza in Brazil, which is one of Brazil's largest retailers. Now, this kind of taps into that insight that people are more inclined to spend money with a brand if it's a brand one of their friends recommends to them, because quite simply, people trust their friends more than they trust brands. Okay, we've seen all kinds of interesting stats flying around about people are X amount more likely to spend money with a brand if it's recommended by a friend on a social network, so on and so forth. A lot of these stats feel slightly opaque and inconclusive, so I've not included any. But I think that idea that people trust their friends more than brands is fairly sound. But check out this that Magazine Luiza are doing.
We always have a friend who knows everything about something, right? Like Beto, who's really up to date on the latest tech trends. He's always asked for his opinion when it's time to purchase something like that. Just like him, there's Zhu, who's keen on decorating. Karina, who has fun buying toys for her kids. And Renata, who's a makeup expert. Now imagine if each of them could have a store with the name they choose, where they could share recommendations about products they think are the coolest. The latest novelties, usage tips, reviews, best prices, and more. Also imagine if they made some money each time someone purchased something at that store. Does it sound nice? It's even better. All of that within Orkut or Facebook, where all their friends are. Neat, huh? That's Magazine Você, your own store to connect with your friends on social networks. All you've got to do is go to the site, sign up, choose one of the 1,000 products from Magazzini Luiza, create your store on Facebook and or Orkut, and earn a commission for each product sold. And to further facilitate it, Magazzini Luiza takes care of everything: inventory, payment, and delivery. It's perfect for you who know better than anyone what your friends want.
So I cut that in the interest of time, but you can see what they're doing. They're letting people create their own Magazzini stores on Facebook and sell their favorite products and earn commission through Facebook, and it's kind of staggering. You know, and when we first saw this, they gave us some information. They said our initial target was to have 10,000 individual stores created by the end of 2012. As you can see here, they had 20,000 individual stores created across Facebook and Orkut within 1 week of launch. That's kind of staggering, isn't it? And it's really interesting. If you think of the kind of success, or rather lack of success, that Facebook has had with storefronts, I think it's really interesting because they claimed that Facebook was going to be this amazing shopping destination. But like I said originally, people don't go there to be sold to. But they do go there to seek and solicit feedback and advice on what products they should get from people they trust, like their friends. So really, really fascinating, and kind of redefines franchising, I think, because now they've suddenly got thousands of sales reps scattered across these social networks, and it's doing pretty seismic things for their business. But cracking on now, so we've looked at how brands can use existing social networks to affect how they do business in a social way. But what's quite interesting is to consider these younger, more digitally and socially native brands that don't necessarily need to lean on established social networks to behave socially. A really nice example of this is something that John Wiltshire said. He's former Chief Innovation Officer at PhD, and he now runs a sort of more boutique offering called The Smithery. And he says, if Facebook disappears and your social strategy goes to shit, did you ever have a social strategy? Okay, you know, if this happened overnight, the brands that would still be left standing aren't the ones that are good at Facebook and Twitter. It would be the brands who are capable of behaving or doing business in a fundamentally social way. And that's a really important point to make, I think. I'll skip that in the interest of time. A good example of this is something we've seen in China called Vancool Star. Now, Vancool, despite only being 4 years old, is already the most popular online fashion retailer in China. And they're getting the success with things like this. It's the catchily named Vancool Star 10% equals 1 billion project. Basically, they're realizing that fashion bloggers and influencers wield an immense amount of power, especially in China. Okay, so they're tapping into these people, and they're saying, hey, you guys, you want to become Vancool stars. When you become a Vancool star, you take photos of yourself wearing Vancool clothing, you spread it across all your blogs and your Tumblrs and your different forums, okay? But people can actually purchase those items of clothing through your photograph. Now, for every item of clothing that people purchase through one of these Vancool stars, the Vancool star gets a hit of commission themselves, which is really interesting, I think. Like I say, it's commission-based advocacy, essentially. But it pays to have these guys on side, because if you're not doing stuff with them, you don't know what they're going to be up to. We had an interesting article in a previous issue of Contagious magazine. It was all about Chinese youth and again, this kind of power that fashion bloggers wield. And there was a nice example of this young lady who's a particularly active social networker, particularly on hers.com, which is a fashion forum, where she posted under the name of White Rose. Okay, now basically, White Rose had identified a particular Balenciaga biker jacket that she really wanted, but knew she was never going to be able to afford it. So she went onto hers.com and she started a petition and said, I really want to get this biker jacket made. Who else wants one? Okay, she got thousands of signatures. Now, there are independent factory owners in China who will trawl these forums and look at the really popular surveys. She got contacted by an independent factory owner. They said, right, if you can get deposits, we'll kick the tires, we'll light the fires, we'll get the factory going, and we'll get a counterfeit version of your jacket made. She went away, she got the deposits from all the forum members, they made the jacket, and they got it on trend and on time. Kind of frightening. This is what people are doing. You know, I'm sure the other guys talking today will kind of confirm this. This is only the tip of the iceberg in terms of the kind of stuff that's happening like this in China. You know, and there is a term for it, which is Xinsai, which basically means the counterfeiting industry. But it's not, it depends, you know, do you see it as counterfeiting or do you see it as open innovation? You know, White Rose didn't want to be a pirate and created that jacket. She just wanted that jacket at a better price point. People just perhaps want a different version of a product that they can't get their hands on. This thing on screen is interesting. This surfaced in China when rumors about the second generation iPad started to kind of float around, and people said it might have an aluminium back like the iPhone 4. Okay, suddenly this thing cropped up. It's halfway between an iPad and an iPhone. It's got the aluminium back like an iPhone 4. Because that's basically people said, right, this is what we're expecting Apple to make, but we want it, and we want it sooner, and we want it cheaper. So this thing came up. Now, Shinzai.com is an interesting website that kind of charts and documents all the different projects and products that are being made. And there's an interesting definition on the homepage of Shinzai.com, and it says, it's a vendor who operates a business without observing traditional rules or practices, often resulting in innovative and unusual products or business models. Okay, now you could have lifted that straight from the homepage of an open innovation platform from a global conglomerate like Unilever or P&G or something. You really could have. But no, it's essentially being used, it's a nice way of referring to this huge counterfeiting culture. But it's interesting because, you know, the Chinese government are obviously trying to stamp this out. But you think once people are used to behaving in this way and getting that kind of control, can you stamp it out, really? And those lines between counterfeiting and open innovation are suddenly really, really blurred. And it's why China is a really fascinating place to look at for social business. But I want to finish off now. So we've looked at brands operating in established social networks and using them to affect how they do business. We've looked at the kind of digital and socially native brands and seeing how they can act socially. But what about the big brands? You know, how are they going to adapt? Can they even adapt to behave like Vancool and so on and so forth? It's an interesting point, but I think they have to. This is an interesting quote from Howard Schultz, who's CEO of Starbucks, just talking about their kind of global expansion. Now, obviously, Starbucks have got a kind of infamously, aggressively colonial approach to expansion, you know, over the last few years, which hasn't done their brand or their business any favors. But they've had to kind of step back from that and take a more considered approach when expanding into new markets now, China being a great example. And he just says simply, what we want to do as a company is put our feet in the shoes of our customers. What does that mean, especially in China? Okay, now I can't tell you exactly what they're going to be doing in China to achieve that, but if I had to put my money on something, it would be on them rolling out something similar to this, which they've already got in the States. This is my Starbucks idea, which is essentially an open innovation platform that Starbucks have launched. Howard Schultz actually left the company and then rejoined as CEO a few years back. And one of the first things he did when he rejoined was crack this thing open. And basically, people can go on and suggest an idea for something they think that Starbucks should do. And it's not a little bit of paper dropped in a suggestion box in a branch of Starbucks. No, it's bigger, it's deeper. You can see all the categories, product ideas. Underneath that, you've got coffee and espresso drinks, frappuccino, food, merchandise, all this kind of stuff. People submit an idea. You know, I mean, blimey, in product ideas under food, there's 12,000 independent suggestions of things Starbucks should do. So people can go on there, they can suggest an idea, but then they can also vote for their favorite ideas. Starbucks then take the most popular ideas and actually put them into practice, which I think is really interesting. But what they also use this for is almost kind of like an ethnographic research platform, so they can use it to sense check the ideas that they're already working on and make sure they're on the right track. And I love that, and it kind of reminds me of this point in The Wizard of Oz. I don't know if any of you guys are fans of the film and recognize this bit. So it's when Dorothy and the gang finally get to Oz and they meet this illusion of the wizard. And it's all booming voices and smoke, and it's very intimidating and impressive, until Toto the dog pulls back the curtain, and you see it's just one man pulling levers like that. That's the wizard. And that's interesting, you know, because this is what brands are like. You pull back the veil of a brand, and it's just a company. It's just a bunch of people pulling levers. And I think that, you know, if people like Starbucks, if companies like Starbucks are willing to pull back that curtain, then why shouldn't other brands? And I think that consumers, when they can see it's just a bunch of people pulling levers, they're going to say, right, I want to have a go at pulling some levers if it means that you're going to produce stuff which is more relevant, more personal, or more meaningful for me. But I want to finish by showing you guys an example of social business that I think is kind of radical but kind of beautiful at the same time, and it's from Patagonia, the outdoor clothing brand. They've taken a really sort of bold step. I mean, they've got a great sort of commitment to sustainability anyway. That's what they're all about as an outdoor brand. But last year, they launched this quite kind of scary thing called the Common Threads Initiative, and it ties into their proposition of reduce, repair, reuse, recycle, and reimagine. Basically, this is all about getting people not to buy new Patagonia products, as counterintuitive as that sounds. So if you hit the Patagonia website, first thing they say is, do you really need to buy a new jacket? Yeah, you know, when people kind of trash their old stuff and buy new stuff, it's great for industry, but if it ends up in a landfill, it's bad for the environment. So can you reduce how much new stuff you buy? You know, if it's saying, well, maybe not, they say, well, how about you repair it? Just repair it and keep going. Our products are really, really foolhardy. They're solid. They can go on for years. So just repair it if a lining's snagged and keep going. If not, if you absolutely have to get rid of it, then what you can do is you can advertise it directly via eBay. Patagonia have got a partnership with eBay. They've got a common thread store where you can buy all these really lovely kind of used Patagonia products that people have kind of had these amazing adventures in. Okay, if it's really beyond even being put on eBay, you can recycle it. Don't put it in a landfill, recycle it. This is what Patagonia are doing. I've got a video. I'm not going to play this because I've kind of run out of time. But it's an interesting thing because it's essentially Patagonia saying, right, this is us nailing our colors to the mast. This is the kind of difference we want to make in the real world. But most importantly, we can't make this difference by ourselves. We need you to help us. It's essentially co-creating sustainable value with their consumers. And that's what social business is all about, because suddenly everybody, the people at the brand and customers, are all stakeholders in that company. And for me, that's the definition of truly social business. Because when it's done right, social business kind of works like this. Brands are more transparent, they're more collaborative. As a result of working in that way, they produce products and services that are more relevant, they're more focused, they're more effective. As a result of that, consumers have more advocacy, they have more trust, they invest more time and money with the brand, which then lets the brand afford to be even more transparent and collaborative. So it's essentially this kind of virtuous circle through which, if you do it right, ultimately everyone profits. Thank you very much.